Good evening. Tonight we're stepping into a different kind of workplace. An American office building in the mid-1990s, back when the carpet smelled faintly of static electricity. The ceiling tiles had a permanent yellow tint from decades of cigarette smoke nobody talks about anymore. And the fastest way to send a document to another city involved a machine that screamed at you before it would cooperate. This was a world of gray partitions, humming fluorescent tubes, and a quiet, low-grade tiredness that 30 or 40 people carried together, all day, every day, without ever quite numbing it. Before we begin, thank you to everyone who keeps requesting these deep dives into ordinary daily life. This channel exists because of you, and every topic you send me shapes what gets made next. If this kind of slow, detailed history helps you fall asleep, feel free to subscribe, but only if it's actually useful to you. There's no pressure here. Tell me in the comments what city you're listening from, and what time it is right now where you are, because somehow it's always close to bedtime somewhere in the world. We're also available on Spotify now, so if you'd rather listen with your phone face down and the screen off, you'll find that link below. And if you ever want something even longer to drift off to, there's an extended ad-free cut for members who like to sleep through several hours at once. Now go ahead and dim the lights, maybe put a fan on for that low, steady hum, and settle in somewhere far more comfortable than a rolling office chair with a broken lever. Get warm. Get still. Let's start with a question. What did it actually feel like to work a full day without a phone in your pocket? To send something important and then simply wait, with no way of knowing if it had arrived? To sit through an entire meeting lit only by a projector bulb and a slide made of plastic? To need an answer to something and have absolutely no way to find it except to ask a person down the hall who might, or might not, actually know? You're about to spend a full day finding out. It's a Monday morning in the middle of the 1990s. Somewhere, a landline is ringing in an empty building, a fax machine is warming up, and your alarm clock, the loud, honest, mechanical kind, is about to go off. Let's begin. The sound arrives before anything else does, a flat, electric buzz with no rhythm to it, no gentle rise in volume, nothing designed to be kind to you. It is 1995, or somewhere close to it, and you are lying in the dark with your eyes half open, doing the same tired arithmetic every working adult in this decade has done 1,000 times before. There is no phone glowing on the nightstand with a soft chime. There is only this box, this specific ugly sound, and a plastic button you will hit so many times over the years that eventually it stops working properly and starts sticking halfway down. You lie there a moment, staring up at a ceiling with that strange, bumpy texture builders used everywhere back then, and you run the numbers. If you skip washing your hair, that's 6 more minutes. If you skip breakfast entirely, that's another 4. You have done this math every single morning for years, and every single morning you arrive at the same answer. Sleep wins. You get up anyway because the day does not wait for you to feel ready for it. Getting dressed happens on a kind of autopilot. Your clothes are either laid out from the night before, or they are not. And if they are not, you are ironing something in a rush a few minutes later, and you will absolutely scorch a small triangle into a shirt collar you'll spend the whole day trying to hide under a jacket. Breakfast, if there's time for it at all, is eaten leaning over the kitchen sink. A slice of toast, a rushed swallow of orange juice that clashes unpleasantly with the toothpaste still lingering in your mouth. There is never quite enough time in the morning. The clock on the stove and the clock on the wall never agree, and you always pick whichever one tells you what you want to hear, which is, without fail, the wrong one to trust. Then comes the drive, the long, dull, shared ordeal that nobody trains you for and everybody does anyway. You back out of the driveway and merge into a stream of other tired people making the same joyless trip, all sealed inside metal boxes, all wishing they were still in bed. Your only real company is the radio, and the choices are limited. A morning show with hosts laughing at jokes only they find funny, a traffic report describing roads you're not currently driving on, or a station playing the same rotation of a dozen songs on a loop so tight you could set a clock by it. There is one particular song about heartbreak and rain that you will hear so many times this year that you'll know every word of it whether you want to or not. Getting where you're going is an act of memory and faith. If you know the route, you drive it without really thinking, arriving with almost no memory of the trip itself. If you don't know it, you're relying on a paper map folded into a shape no human being has ever successfully refolded, or a set of directions scrawled on a sticky note wedged against the dashboard. There is no calm voice recalculating your route. There is only you, squinting at street names while trying to merge across 3 lanes of traffic, hopping the exit you need hasn't already slipped past the window behind you. And when the traffic simply stops, and it does often for no announced reason, it just stops. No notification tells you why. No estimated arrival time updates itself on a screen. You sit in a still river of brake lights, watching the dashboard clock creep toward the exact moment you will officially be late, powerless to do anything about it. You inch forward a car length. You wait. Somewhere ahead, invisible and infuriating, is whatever caused all of this, and you will never actually find out what it was. Eventually, traffic loosens its grip, and the building comes into view, a flat, low structure the color of wet sand, ringed by a parking lot full of nearly identical cars and exactly one struggling tree that the landscaping budget allowed for. Inside, the lobby smells like carpet cleaner and quietly fatting ambition. You either sign your name on a clipboard at the front desk or slide a stiff paper card into a machine that stamps the precise minute of your arrival, a permanent record that you were, in fact, 90 seconds late. There's no key card, no fingerprint scanner, just a security guard who has greeted you by name every single morning for 3 years and will still, without fail, ask to see your badge. The parking lot has its own unwritten social order. The good spots near the entrance belong, silently and permanently, to people who have worked here longer than you've been alive. Everyone else circles the distant edges of the lot. Walking a hike so long it functions as your only real exercise of the day. You'll loop the lot twice hopping a closer spot opens up, waste several minutes doing it, and end up parking exactly where you would have parked the first time. And somewhere out there is your manager's car. And you've learned, without anyone teaching you, to note whether it's already there, because that tells you exactly how much trouble you might be in today. The building itself offers no warmth at all. It's 3 or 4 stories of tinted glass and beige paneling, the kind of design that appears in business parks all across the country, as if one architect drew it once decades ago and everyone else simply agreed never to try improving on it. No curves, no real color. A flagpole out front, a low hedge, and that one lonely tree standing bravely in a square of wood chips, doing its very best to suggest that nature is welcome here. It is not. Stepping through the doors, the smell hits you immediately, a specific blend of industrial carpet cleaner, brewing coffee, and the faint, warm plastic scent of machines that have been running all night without anyone watching them. The floor is a swirl of mauve and teal, colors selected by some long-forgotten committee to be as inoffensive as possible, and somehow achieving the opposite effect entirely. A large plastic plant sits gathering dust in the corner, its leaves permanently, artificially green. This is the face the company presents to visitors, and it says, quite clearly, that nothing exciting has happened here in a long time. Getting past the front desk is its own small ritual of minor humiliation. You sign your name, or you slide that stiff time card into a machine that punches the time onto it with a loud, judgmental thunk. A thunk that does not care about the traffic jam, or the 90 seconds, or the fact that you left the house on time. It simply records the truth. And presiding over the whole entrance is a guard of endless patience and remarkably short memory, who greets you warmly, asks about your weekend, admires your travel mug, and then, without fail, asks to see the laminated badge clipped to your shirt, squinting at a photo of a slightly younger, slightly more hopeful version of you. You show it to him. He nods, satisfied, as though he's just successfully stopped an intruder. You head for the elevator, ready to face the fabric-walled box waiting for you upstairs. And that box, your cubicle, deserves a proper introduction, because it is where you will spend more of your waking hours than almost anywhere else in your life. Picture a small enclosure about the size of a horse stall, its walls covered in a scratchy gray fabric that exists mainly so you have somewhere to pin up a calendar of kittens or a beach you'll probably never visit. You have a desk, a chair with exactly one working adjustment lever, and just enough floor space to turn around once before bumping into something. The walls rise high enough to trap the smell of your neighbor's lunch, but not high enough to grant you an ounce of real privacy. You are one of perhaps 40 identical enclosures spread across an open floor of quiet, collective endurance. The walls themselves are a small marvel of accidental cruelty. They reach roughly shoulder height when you're standing, which means the moment you rise from your seat, you make sudden, startled eye contact with a coworker doing the exact same thing at the exact same moment, like two animals popping out of neighboring burrows. Sit back down, and the walls rise just high enough to make you feel boxed in without ever making you feel alone. The fabric covering them is some indeterminate shade between gray and beige, chosen, it seems, specifically because it shows neither dirt nor personality. You've decorated a little because you're only human. There's a calendar, a mug holding pens that no longer write, kept anyway out of some unexplainable loyalty. A small framed photo angled just so, both for you and for any visitor who might wander by and need reminding that you are, in fact, a person with a life outside this fabric box. And then there are the sticky notes, a whole archaeological record of your responsibilities, layered thick around the edges of your monitor, until the actual screen becomes a small window peeking out from a paper frame. Sound moves through this landscape with brutal efficiency. The walls block your view of your neighbors, but never your hearing. You exist inside a constant, low wash of other people's private lives. The man 2 cubicles over having a phone call he genuinely believes nobody else can hear. The click of 30 or 40 keyboards going at once. The distant electronic screech of the fax machine starting up. The very specific rhythm of a coworker who types using only 2 fingers and remarkable force. You come to know everyone's cough, everyone's ringtone. You could probably identify half the floor just from the particular way they sigh. And then there's the smell, because a cubicle traps odor the way a valley traps morning fog. Someone microwaved fish again. Someone's cologne arrives a full 10 seconds before they do. The entire floor shares one recycled supply of air, so a single strong lunch becomes a shared experience for everyone nearby, whether they consented to it or not. This is your kingdom, a fabric box inside a field of identical fabric boxes, and it is time, finally, to actually get to work. First, though, you have to wake up the machine sitting on your desk, and that is very much its own event. You reach for the power button on a heavy plastic tower the color of old teeth, topped by a monitor so deep and so heavy it could double as a piece of furniture. The machine groans awake with a series of beeps and mechanical whirs, and a startup sound that feels far too dramatic for what it's actually accomplishing. White text scrolls past on a black screen, listing numbers and words you don't understand, but that clearly means something important to the machine itself. This is, by the standards of the day, a genuinely impressive piece of technology, and it has less processing power than a modern musical greeting card. You will nonetheless treat it, for years, like a small and temperamental household god. The physical size of the thing alone commands a kind of respect. The tower sits beside your desk or hums beneath it, heavy, beige, with a floppy disk slot and a chunky power button, and a tiny indicator light that blinks whenever the machine is thinking, which it turns out is often and slowly. The monitor is the true giant of the setup, a deep glass tube housed in plastic, weighing about as much as a car battery, radiating a faint, constant warmth against your face when you sit close to it. Moving it requires 2 hands, a strong back, and a small prayer that you won't drop it. Starting the computer is not so much an action as it is a ceremony. You press the button. And the machine answers with a symphony of internal throat clearing. A beep, a whir, the unmistakable grinding sound of a hard drive spinning up like a tiny jet engine coming to life. Then the wall of white text appears, scrolling by faster than you could ever read it, and you have long since learned not to touch anything while this is happening. You simply wait, coffee cup in hand, like someone watching a process they're not quite permitted to understand. The waiting itself becomes part of the daily rhythm. In the time it takes this machine to become usable, you can get your coffee, hang up your coat, say good morning to 3 different coworkers, and skim a printed memo. There is no instant power on, no waking from sleep mode. Every single morning is a full, slow, ceremonial restart that simply cannot be rushed. Press a key too early, hopping to hurry things along, and the machine punishes you with an angry beep, and sometimes cruelly restarts the entire sequence from scratch. You stopped pressing keys early a long time ago. You've been trained, the way a dog eventually learns to stop testing the kitchen counter. And yet, for all its limitations, this beige machine really is something close to a miracle, and somewhere underneath the daily frustration, you know it. It types without needing ink. It calculates without a pencil. It stores documents that used to require an entire filing drawer. You will come to feel about it the way you feel about a difficult pet forgiving its crashes, coaxing it gently through its freezes, quietly negotiating with it before anything important. It will lose your work. It will terrify you more than once, and you will sit down in front of it again tomorrow morning, press that same chunky button, and wait faithfully for it to wake up all over again. But before any of that real work can begin, there's a ritual that comes first. And it is, without question, the most sacred one of the entire day, the coffee. Let's head down to the break room now, because before anything else can happen today, you need coffee, and the coffee here is very much its own experience. The break room is a small windowless space lit by a fluorescent tube that flickers just often enough to give everyone inside it the pale, slightly greenish complexion of someone who hasn't slept properly in a week. There's a refrigerator humming in the corner, packed with other people's carefully labeled lunches, a round table surrounded by mismatched chairs nobody remembers acquiring, a bulletin board pinned with a labor law poster nobody has ever actually read from top to bottom, and glowing faintly on the counter like some kind of shrine, the coffee machine itself. This room is where morale comes to sit quietly for a few minutes before shuffling back to its cubicle. The coffee inside that machine has not so much been brewed as it has been slowly threatened into existence. It's been sitting on the hot plate since someone made the first pot at 7 in the morning, and by the time you get to it, it has reduced itself into something closer to tar than to an actual beverage. You pour a cup anyway, because that's simply how mornings work here. It tastes like burnt pennies and quiet disappointment, but it is hot, and it is free. And in an American office building in the middle of the 90s, that is basically fine dining. The refrigerator operates by its own unwritten laws, and every item inside it is labeled with someone's name written in defensive black marker. A small, desperate assertion of property rights in a lawless environment. There's a yogurt that has been sitting in the door so long it has developed what can only be described as a personality. There's a lunch someone brought in on a Monday and completely forgot about, and by Thursday, it will announce its presence to the entire floor without needing to be opened. Somewhere at the back sits a bottle of ketchup that belongs to no one and is used by everyone, its cap fused permanently shut by time and neglect. You learn quickly not to go digging around in there. You take only what's yours and you leave the rest well alone. There's an unspoken code of conduct around that coffee pot, and it is treated with something close to religious seriousness. The one true, unforgivable sin is taking the very last cup and failing to start a fresh pot, leaving the empty carafe to slowly bake dry on the hot plate for whoever comes along next. This person is a villain. This person is discussed quietly in disapproving tones for the rest of the week. Nobody ever seems to know exactly who keeps doing it, but the low-grade resentment simmers across the floor like a fever that never quite breaks. So you check the level before you walk away, and if you happen to take the last of it, you perform the small civic duty of starting a new pot, a quiet act of decency in an otherwise indifferent world. And despite everything wrong with it, the burnt taste, the flickering light, the refrigerator that qualifies as a minor biohazard, this room is genuinely important to you. It's where you steal a few private minutes away from your desk. It's where you overhear the good gossip. It's where you can stand in comfortable, wordless silence next to a coworker while the machine gurgles its way through another pot. The coffee is bad. The room is worse. But it's warm, it's free, and it's yours, at least for a few minutes before you have to march back to the beige to do whatever it is they're actually paying you to do. With a lukewarm cup in hand, you head back to your desk, and that's when you notice it, the little red light on your phone, blinking steadily, patiently, letting you know that messages are waiting. Let's talk about that phone for a moment because it rules over your desk in a way nothing else quite does. It's a heavy beige console, tethered to the wall by a coiled cord that has, somehow, through no direct action of your own, twisted itself into a knot that no human being could ever fully undo. There's a whole row of buttons along the bottom with cryptic labels, transfer, conference, and one mysterious button nobody in the office has ever pressed on purpose. You lift the receiver, and it hovers a few inches from the base, permanently held there by that stubborn coiled cord. The blinking light is the part you notice first, and it fills you with a specific, familiar dread. It's a small red bulb pulsing steadily whenever a message is waiting, a tiny heartbeat of obligation glowing in the corner of your vision all morning. There's no preview, no caller name, no transcript, no way to know before you actually listen whether the message behind that light is good news, bad news, or nothing at all. It simply pulses, patient and merciless, until you finally give in and pick up the receiver. Retrieving your messages is a small trial in itself. You dial in, and a flat robotic voice demands a passcode, a string of numbers you set up years ago and can, somehow, never quite remember on the first try. You guess. You guess again. Eventually, the system threatens quite seriously to lock you out entirely. When you finally get through, the voice announces your message count with a kind of grim formality, and then plays everything back in the least convenient order possible, forcing you to sit through every single one just to reach the message that actually matters. The messages themselves form a genre all their own. The most common type is someone leaving a callback number, recited at the speed of an auctioneer, forcing you to replay the message 3 or 4 times while you scramble for a pen that actually writes, catching the digits one desperate fragment at a time. There's no way to pause, no way to slow it down. There's only you, hunched over a sticky note, silently begging a recording to please just say the number again, watching your morning quietly drain away one area code at a time. And then there's the worst message of all, the one that ruins the whole morning in a single sentence. It's your boss, voice clipped, offering absolutely no context, simply saying he needs to see you when you get a chance. No reason given. No hint of whether you're in trouble being handed a promotion or about to be assigned something you'll hate. Just that flat, unreadable request and a click. And now the coffee sits cold and heavy in your stomach, and you spend the next 20 minutes silently rehearsing a defense for crimes you're not even entirely sure you committed. It isn't even 9 o'clock yet. Somewhere else on your desk sits the newest addition to your working life, a strange and genuinely exciting new tool called electronic mail. Somewhere in the building, a computer is connected to the outside world through an ordinary phone line, and every time it tries to reach out, it makes a sound like a robot clearing its throat underwater, a screech of digital static that somehow still feels like magic every time you hear it. When it works, it really does feel like witchcraft. You can type a message to someone in another department, or even another city entirely, and they might read it later that same day. Assuming the server stays up, the connection holds, and nobody else in the building needs to use the phone line at the same moment. That sound of connecting is unforgettable. Honestly, a noise burned permanently into the memory of anyone who worked through this decade. A sequence of beeps, hisses, and static that sounds like a fax machine, and a dial tone having a genuine disagreement. It takes its time. You sit through the whole strange, screeching performance, and if you're lucky, at the end of it, you're connected. If you're not, the whole thing simply gives up and you start over from scratch. But when it does work, the magic is real and it genuinely stops you for a second. You type a message to someone down the hall or across the country, send it off into the wires, and sometime later it arrives. No stamp, no envelope, no 3-day wait for the mail truck. It feels a little bit like getting away with something. The older folks in the office regard the whole thing with deep suspicion, printing out every single email they receive and filing the paper copy carefully away, unwilling to trust a message they can't physically hold in their hands. And honestly, their caution isn't entirely unreasonable, because the whole system is held together with little more than tape and hope. The connection shares that same phone line, which means if anyone happens to pick up a receiver elsewhere in the building to make an ordinary call, they can instantly kill your connection mid-message, sending whatever you were sending straight into the void. The server, wherever it physically lives, goes down without warning and without explanation. And when it does, the entire concept of email simply stops existing for a few hours. You've learned the hard way to send anything important twice. The email addresses themselves are their own small puzzle, long strings of letters, dots, and a strange looping symbol nobody's entirely sure how to pronounce out loud yet. You write them down carefully, because one wrong character and your message either vanishes completely or lands awkwardly on the desk of a total stranger. The whole system feels fragile and improvised, like something clever people invented and then handed off to the rest of the working world before anyone had quite finished working out the kinks. And of course, the moment people discovered they could send messages instantly, they began sending the absolute worst possible messages, instantly. The forwarded chain letter arrives, threatening 7 years of bad luck unless you pass it along to 10 coworkers within the hour. The forwarded joke arrives. The inspirational story arrives. The warning about a computer virus arrives, which turns out to be the only virus actually spreading through the office. And presiding over all of it, without fail, is a woman down in accounting who has just discovered the forward button and has apparently decided it is her sacred personal mission to use it as often as humanly possible. You will be deleting her messages for the rest of your working life. Let's move on now to what might genuinely be the beating heart of the entire office, the fax machine. This squat gray box lives in its own little corner and communicates entirely through screeching, like a kettle in the middle of a nervous breakdown. To send anything, you first have to fill out a cover sheet, because apparently every fax requires its own polite little introduction letter explaining that a fax is, in fact, about to follow it. The machine itself sits there humming faintly, always on, always half alert, connected to its own dedicated phone line, a privilege granted to almost nothing else in the building. It has a tray for outgoing pages, a slot where incoming ones slowly emerge, and a tiny display that flashes cryptic little messages about its current mood. When it's working properly, it practically purrs. When it isn't, it lets out a low, ominous whir that tells the entire floor something somewhere has gone badly wrong. Filling out the cover sheet is the first step, and it's a gloriously pointless little ritual. Before you can send a single page of actual content, you have to fill out an entire separate page whose only job is to announce that a fax is coming, who it's from, who it's going to, how many pages follow, and a blank space for a short message, which most people fill in with something like, "Please see attached," or more honestly, "Call me when you get this." You are, in effect, writing a formal letter to introduce another letter, and everybody performs this little piece of bureaucratic theater without ever questioning it. Actually sending the thing is an act of both faith and physical dexterity. You dial the destination number on the keypad, wait for the machine on the other end to answer with its own answering screech, and then feed your pages into the tray one at a time, watching nervously as the rollers grab each sheet and pull it slowly through. This is the moment of real danger. If two pages happen to stick together, if the paper's slightly wrinkled, if the alignment is off by even a hair, the machine jams, chewing your careful document into a crumpled accordion and forcing you to start the entire process over from the very beginning. The transmission itself is a slow, screaming ordeal. The machine works by turning your document into sound and shrieking that sound down the phone line, one line of the page at a time, in a piercing electronic wail that fills the whole corner of the office. A single page takes what feels like forever. A 10-page document is a genuine commitment. You stand there listening to the machine screech and pause and screech again, a noise so unpleasant that everyone within about 20 feet of you quietly wishes you'd hurry up and finish. And yet when it actually works, it does feel like a small miracle. Somewhere far away in another beige office in another city, your document emerges from another identical gray machine, warm to the touch, its ink slightly smeared, its edges curled from the heat of the process. A contract, a signature, a hand-drawn diagram sent through the air along a telephone wire and reassembled on the other end in minutes instead of days. It's faded. It's streaked. It's often only barely legible. But it arrived, and in this decade, that borders on genuine sorcery. So you fill out another cover sheet, and you do the whole thing again. No day in this office is complete without at least one confrontation with your greatest nemesis, the photocopier. This is a machine roughly the size of a small car. With the temperament of a toddler who missed their nap, you need 40 copies of a report by 10 o'clock, which means, without fail, the machine will jam somewhere around copy number 3. The copier dominates its own alcove, a hulking beige and gray beast that radiates heat and hums with a deep internal energy of its own. It has a glass plate on top for your original, a heavy lid to press it flat, and a control panel covered in buttons that promise all sorts of features nobody in the building has ever successfully used. It is, simultaneously, the single most important machine on the floor and the single most despised, a contradiction everyone has simply learned to accept. The jam is its favorite weapon, and its timing is nothing short of supernatural. It will run flawlessly for weeks when you only ever need a single copy, and then somehow sense the exact moment you need 40 copies of a 40-page report before a 10 o'clock meeting, and choose precisely that moment to seize up entirely. A little screen flashes a cryptic error code alongside a crude internal diagram, pointing you toward a jam in some section, labeled with a letter and a number that corresponds to absolutely nothing you can actually locate. Clearing it is a form of amateur surgery. You open the front panel, then the side panel, then a small door you didn't even know existed, revealing a hot, dark interior full of rollers and green plastic levers, each one silently daring you to pull it. You pull them all. Somewhere deep in the machine's insides, you finally find it, a single sheet of paper, crumpled and torn, wedged into a space that seems physically impossible. You extract it in pieces. You close every door. You press start. The exact same error flashes right back at you. Now a line has formed behind you, and this is the true horror of the whole situation. One by one, your coworkers arrive, each holding their own urgent document, each silently watching you fail. They offer advice. Have you checked the second tray? Did you open the back panel? Sometimes you just have to lift the green thing. Nobody actually understands how the machine works, but everyone has a theory, a personal superstition, a small ritual they perform that may or may not have helped once, years ago. You are now the person holding up the entire floor, sweating gently under the fluorescent lights, locked in combat with a machine the size of a small car. And then mysteriously, for no reason anyone can explain, it starts working again. You didn't fix it. You simply performed the rituals, pulled the levers, muttered a few curses under your breath, and at some point the machine simply decided to forgive you. The copies begin to flow, warm and faintly smelling of toner, and you gather your 40 pages with the quiet, exhausted relief of a survivor. You'll be back tomorrow. It will jam again. This is an endless war, one you will never truly win, and the copier, ancient, unknowable, indifferent, will almost certainly outlast every single person who has ever cursed its name. Let's talk about what you're actually wearing today, because in an office like this, clothing is never just clothing. It's a whole unspoken language, and everyone on this floor is fluent in it whether they realize it or not. From Monday through Thursday, you're wrapped in the full uniform of corporate seriousness. If you're a man, that means a suit and a tie knotted just a little too tightly around your throat, a strip of decorative fabric that serves no practical function whatsoever except to announce, silently and constantly, that you are a professional, that you are to be taken seriously, that you have successfully performed the small daily ritual the tie represents. It's slightly too snug by design. By 3 in the afternoon, you've loosened it a full inch, and you feel that release the way a tired horse feels the loosening of its saddle after a long ride. If you're a woman, the uniform brings its own particular set of trials. There are the shoulder pads sewn into nearly every blazer on the floor, quietly giving the entire female workforce the broad, squared-off silhouette of a linebacker. A fashion choice the whole decade committed to with a confidence that, looking back, is honestly a little baffling. There's the pantyhose, a genuinely cruel little invention that runs the instant it so much as brushes against a desk edge, which means every woman on this floor keeps a spare pair tucked away in a drawer, just in case. The whole outfit functions as a kind of armor, worn to command a level of respect the workplace doesn't naturally offer on its own, and it's worn every single day with a straight face and a quietly aching pair of feet. The building's thermostat, meanwhile, wages its own private war against every single outfit on the floor. It's controlled by someone nobody has ever actually met, set to a temperature apparently decided by committee, and it seems almost deliberately designed to make every single wardrobe choice wrong. In summer, the air conditioning roars on so aggressively that you find yourself reaching for the very blazer you resent wearing. In winter, the heating blasts through the vents until you're quietly sweating through a shirt you have no way of removing in a professional setting. So you keep a cardigan draped permanently over the back of your chair, a small personal hedge against a climate that answers to nobody, dressing not really for the weather outside at all, but for the mystery hiding somewhere inside the building's own walls. And then, arriving at the end of every single week like a small, glowing mercy, comes Casual Friday. On this one blessed day, the rules loosen just slightly, and the entire floor visibly transforms. Out come the pleated khakis. Out come the polo shirts. Out come sweaters that don't itch against your collarbone the way a dress shirt does. Men arrive with their collars open, looking visibly younger, visibly lighter. Women wear flats instead of heels and seem to breathe a little easier. There's a giddy kind of looseness in the air, the feeling of an entire office quietly getting away with something small. But don't mistake this for real freedom, because Casual Friday comes with its own rulebook, one enforced by a memo taped permanently to the wall of the break room. No jeans with holes in them, no sneakers, no shirts with anything printed across the front. Casual, as it turns out, has been very carefully predefined by management to mean only slightly less formal than usual and not 1 inch more. It is freedom on a leash, a small taste of rebellion, fully pre-approved in triplicate. And even so, you love it completely. It's the best day of the week, and it's only casual because someone with the authority to say so decided you were allowed to be. Now let's talk about something that would absolutely horrify a modern office worker, the smoking. In the earlier years of this decade, lighting a cigarette right at your own desk was simply part of the daily routine, tapping ash into a small glass tray sitting right beside your keyboard while you work through your morning tasks. The entire floor sits beneath a faint gray haze, and the ceiling tiles overhead have slowly, steadily shifted from white toward the color of weak, oversteeped tea. Over time, though, the rules begin to tighten. A memo appears announcing that smoking will now be restricted to certain designated areas. Then another memo tightens things further, and eventually, the smokers are pushed entirely out of the building, exiled to a small patch of pavement near the loading dock, where they form their own tight little society, trading gossip, trading lighters, taking far more short breaks throughout the day than anyone else on the floor quite dares to keep count of. It's genuinely terrible for the lungs, and yet strangely wonderful for the social life of the building. Out there on that stretch of pavement, the mailroom clerk and a company vice president end up standing shoulder to shoulder, sharing a lighter, trading exactly the kind of information that never appears in any official memo. Deals get quietly struck out there. Secrets get traded. Small office romances begin and occasionally end right there by the dumpsters. If you genuinely want to know what's actually happening inside this company at any given moment, you don't check your email, you take up smoking, and within about 10 minutes, you know absolutely everything worth knowing. The frequency of these little breaks becomes a low-grade, unspoken scandal that nobody quite addresses directly. Smokers slip away every hour, sometimes more often, vanishing for a companionable 10 minutes while the non-smokers glance up from their cubicles, doing some private mental math about exactly how much paid company time is drifting away in little gray clouds out by the dumpsters. There's resentment. There's quiet muttering. There's the occasional half-serious talk of taking up the habit purely for the break time it buys. And through all of it, the smokers remain a small, happy, slightly wheezing tribe, entirely unbothered, bonded together by fire and nicotine, and the simple pleasure of 10 uninterrupted minutes outside. Now let's file into the conference room, because it's time for a meeting, and a meeting in this office is really the truest possible measure of whether anything is going to get done today at all. At the front of the room sits an overhead projector, a glowing machine that throws the light of what feels like a small sun onto a pull-down screen. Your manager sets a clear plastic sheet onto the glowing glass surface, revealing a chart nobody can quite read from the back row, and then slides a second sheet on top of it, very slightly crooked. The room is warm. The projector fan hums steadily. Someone dims the overhead lights, which turns out to be a serious tactical mistake, because now at least 2 or 3 people are technically asleep with their eyes still open. The conference room itself is a long rectangle dominated by a laminate table ringed with rolling chairs that each squeak in a slightly different pitch. There's a triangular speakerphone sitting in the center of the table, which will, at some point today, connect the room to someone in another city entirely, their voice arriving distorted and half a second delayed, so that everyone ends up politely talking over one another in a garbled, well-meaning mess. There's a whiteboard along one wall, streaked with the faded ghosts of previous meetings, half-erased phrases, a phone number that's been sitting there, unclaimed for months. This is a room where decisions come to be gently, endlessly postponed. The overhead projector is really the star of the whole performance, and it's a machine of genuine, if slightly absurd, drama. It has a flat glass surface lit from below by a bulb of near-blinding intensity, and a mirrored arm above it that throws the image up onto the screen at the front of the room. Your manager arrives with a stack of transparencies, clear plastic sheets covered in printed charts and bullet points, and lays them down on the glass one at a time. The image blooms enormous across the screen, and everyone in the room squints just a little, because the text was clearly designed to be read on a printed page, not projected 6 feet wide across a wall. The transparencies never quite behave themselves. They slide the moment they're touched, so every single chart ends up sitting slightly crooked, tilting off the edge of the screen at an angle nobody bothers to correct. They cling to one another with static, so peeling a single sheet off the stack produces a small crackling sound, and occasionally 2 sheets lift off together by accident. Your manager writes directly onto them in real time with a special marker, adding arrows and underlines as he talks, the marker squeaking faintly against the plastic with every stroke. The physical conditions of the room conspire quietly against everyone's consciousness. Dimming the lights so the projected screen shows up more clearly turns out to be a genuine mistake, because the combination of darkness, the warm mechanical hum of the projector's cooling fan, and the low, steady drone of someone reading bullet points aloud is a recipe practically engineered by nature to induce sleep. Around the table, eyes glaze over one by one. Heads dip forward and then jerk back upright. At least a couple of people have achieved the rare and advanced skill of sleeping with their eyes technically open, nodding along at intervals just convincingly enough to prove they're still alive. The actual content of the meeting, meanwhile, could easily have been delivered in a single sentence, maybe two. There's an update everyone in the room already knew about before walking in. There's a discussion that circles back around to the exact same point 3 or 4 times without ever quite landing anywhere new. There's always one person who asks a question purely to demonstrate they're paying attention, stretching the whole ordeal out by another 10 minutes in the process. Somewhere around the 50-minute mark, someone finally says the magic phrase, "Let's take this offline," which means nothing at all and resolves absolutely nothing, but somehow sounds decisive enough to move the conversation along toward its conclusion. And the grand result, the entire fruit of 90 minutes of collective human effort, is almost always the exact same thing: a decision to schedule another meeting. A smaller follow-up group will circle back. Action items get assigned that will, quietly and completely, be forgotten before anyone even reaches the elevator. You file out into the bright hallway afterward, blinking, your legs stiff from sitting, your brain lightly poached, having accomplished in the end precisely nothing. And back at your desk, the actual work sits exactly where you left it, patient as ever, waiting. While we're on the subject, let's take a moment to really study the strange, particular language spoken inside this building, because although it's technically English, very little of it actually seems to mean anything at all. Your coworkers don't talk about problems anymore. They talk about challenges and opportunities. They don't simply agree on a plan, they circle back, they touch base, they get their ducks in a row. Somebody wants to leverage synergy to move the needle on a paradigm shift, and everyone around the table nods along seriously, as though this is a completely normal sentence spoken by a completely normal human being. The first rule of this corporate dialect is that nothing bad is ever allowed to sound bad. There are no real problems in this building, only challenges. And if a challenge grows large enough that it truly can't be ignored anymore, it gets quietly upgraded to an opportunity, which is really just the word used to describe a disaster that someone specific is now responsible for cleaning up. A project isn't failing, it's facing headwinds. A department isn't drowning in work, it's simply under-resourced. This vocabulary exists for exactly one purpose: to wrap something genuinely unpleasant in enough soft padding that nobody has to actually feel the sharp edges of the truth underneath it. Then there's the enormous category of phrases that exist purely to describe talking about doing a thing as a kind of substitute for actually doing the thing itself. People touch base, they circle back, they reach out, they loop you in. They take things offline and put a pin in it for later. They want to get all their ducks in a row before they run anything up the flagpole. Every single one of these phrases describes a conversation about a task, rather than the task itself, which is fitting, honestly, because this entire office seems to run almost entirely on conversations about tasks rather than the tasks getting done. And the most ambitious speakers reach for the truly grand phrases, the ones that somehow mean the very least of all. Someone stands up during a meeting and announces a plan to leverage synergy across the different verticals in order to move the needle on a paradigm shift going forward. Nobody in the room actually knows what any of that means, including, quite possibly, the person who just said it, but everyone nods gravely anyway, because admitting confusion out loud would mean revealing that you, too, don't speak this particular dialect as fluently as you'd like everyone to believe. There's a specific, quiet horror to the exact moment you realize this language has fully infected your own vocabulary. It happens slowly, and then all at once. One afternoon, you open your mouth in a meeting fully intending to say something plain and human, and instead what comes out is, "Let's take this offline and reconvene once we have more bandwidth." You hear the words leave your own mouth. They just hang there in the air for a second. Everyone around the table nods, because to them, you've said something completely normal, and that somehow is the most unsettling part of the whole thing. By the end, you speak this strange office dialect without even thinking about it anymore, this bizarre beige world language, and you carry it home with you, catching yourself more than once, casually asking your own family to align on dinner plans. You've become fluent. There is, as far as you can tell, no cure. Now let's talk for a moment about paper, because a 1990s office runs on paper the way a human body runs on blood. Everything must be printed, stamped, filed, and copied, then, quite often, copied again just in case. Memos land in your inbox, and by inbox, I mean an actual physical plastic tray sitting on the corner of your desk, slowly filling with documents you will very likely never fully read. There are forms in triplicate. There are carbon copies that leave a faint smudge of blue ink across your fingers by the end of the day. And there is a filing cabinet so heavy it could probably anchor a small ship, tucked into the corner of the room, holding what feels like the entire recorded history of the department. The sheer volume of paper moving through this building is difficult to properly overstate, because every single action taken inside this office ends up generating a physical document of some kind. You print out an email just to read it comfortably, then print a second copy purely to file away. You print a draft, mark it up carefully by hand, then print the revision. Every single meeting produces both a printed agenda beforehand and a set of printed minutes afterward. The recycling bins overflow daily without fail, and somewhere, quite literally, a forest is being consumed to keep this all running. Your inbox tray is the very first stop on this long paper journey, and it's not a folder sitting on a screen. It's an actual shallow plastic basket perched on the corner of your desk. Documents land in it steadily throughout the day, dropped off by a mail cart that rolls slowly through the floor, or handed to you directly by a coworker passing through. There's an unspoken understanding on this floor that the tray functions as a kind of purgatory, a place where paper waits its turn, and the truly experienced office worker never lets that pile grow so tall that it eventually avalanches straight onto the floor. The forms themselves bring their own special torment, and the worst of them arrive in triplicate. You fill out the top sheet by hand, pressing down hard with the pen, and the pressure transfers your handwriting through layers of carbon paper to the copies stacked underneath, in a distinctive, slightly smeared shade of blue. One copy stays with you. One goes off to filing. One disappears entirely into a department you have genuinely never once visited and honestly couldn't picture if asked. By the end of the day, your fingers are faintly stained with carbon, and your own signature has degraded, through sheer repetition, into a meaningless scribble you barely recognize as your own handwriting anymore. And the filing cabinet standing in the corner is the great vault where all of this paper eventually goes to rest, a heavy monolith of gray steel that seems to warp the floor slightly beneath its own weight. Its drawers slide open with a deep metallic rumble, revealing row after row of hanging folders packed shoulder to shoulder, labeled according to a system that presumably made perfect sense to whoever set it up originally, years ago, and to absolutely nobody since. Finding a specific document in there requires not so much knowledge of the alphabet as an understanding of the particular mind of whoever filed it in the first place. And the deepest truth about this paper-based office, the one that becomes clearer the longer you work here, is that nothing here ever truly, fully disappears. There's no delete key for a filing cabinet, no simple way to make a document quietly cease to exist. It gets copied, distributed, and filed away in 3 separate places at once, which means genuinely erasing anything would require a coordinated search and destroy mission across the entire building. So it all just steadily accumulates instead, layer upon layer, year after year, a slow-growing sediment of memos and forms and faintly blue-smudged carbon copies, the permanent geological record of a company that never quite learned how to stop making paper. Let's gather now at what might genuinely be the true information center of the entire building, the water cooler. Forget the memos. Forget the email chains. If you actually want to know what's happening inside this company, you stand near the tall plastic jug of water and you simply wait. It's here in hushed voices, low and careful, that the real news travels. Who's about to get promoted, who got caught napping in the supply closet, whether the rumors about layoffs floating around actually have any truth to them. The water itself is almost beside the point. You'll fill a small paper cone anyway and sip it slowly, just to look appropriately casual while you linger. The cooler itself is a wonderfully unremarkable piece of equipment, and that's really the entire secret to its power. It stands quietly in a hallway or a tucked-away corner, a tall white unit crowned by an enormous upside-down plastic jug that releases a deep, satisfying glug every time somebody fills a cup. It offers two spigots, one for cold water and one for a lukewarm imitation of something hot. And it is, on the surface, entirely ordinary, which is exactly what makes it the perfect cover story. Nobody can accuse you of loitering when you're technically just staying hydrated. The little paper cups themselves are part of the whole ritual, and they're almost aggressively impractical by design. They're small waxed paper cones with no flat bottom whatsoever, which means you can never actually set one down. You have to hold your water the entire time you're drinking it, which conveniently keeps you standing at the cooler just a little longer than strictly necessary. You crush the empty cone in your hand once you're done, grab another, fill it again, and stretch your visit out under the perfectly reasonable guise of simple thirst. The information flowing through this particular channel is of a quality no official memo could ever quite match. Official memos tell you what management wants you to believe is happening. The water cooler tells you what's actually true. It's here you learn that a promotion has already been quietly decided before it's officially announced. It's here you learn that a project everyone praised enthusiastically in yesterday's meeting is, in reality, falling apart behind the scenes. It's here you learn that two people from entirely different departments have started arriving separately in the mornings, and somehow always seem to be leaving together at the end of the day. There's a whole unspoken etiquette to how this works, a kind of choreography everyone on the floor absorbs without ever being formally taught it. You never launch straight into gossip. You start with the weather, maybe a comment about the traffic, a shared complaint about the copier jamming again, and only once the ground has been properly prepared do voices drop, and the real conversation quietly begins. You learn, over time, exactly who can be trusted with what kind of information, who repeats absolutely everything they hear, and who functions like an actual vault. A careless word dropped at the water cooler can travel the length of the entire floor before lunchtime rolls around. The subject matter itself ranges from the genuinely significant to the intensely, uncomfortably personal. Layoff rumors always seem to surface here first, passed carefully from person to person like a lit match nobody quite wants to be holding, gaining a small new detail with every retelling. Workplace scandals arrive here fully formed, seemingly out of nowhere. And then, of course, there's the coworker who treats the water cooler as something close to a personal confessional, and who will, whether you actually ask to hear it or not, walk you slowly through every painful detail of his ongoing divorce while you nod politely and sip your water and gradually realize you now know significantly more about his marriage than you do about the actual project you're supposed to be working on together. For all its idle, unassuming appearance, this water cooler is genuinely one of the most quietly powerful institutions in the entire building, and everyone on the floor understands this on some level, even if nobody would ever say it out loud. Reputations are built here, in small approving murmurs. Reputations are just as easily demolished here, in a single raised eyebrow. Alliances quietly form over shared cups of lukewarm water. Careers get nudged, one direction or another, by conversations that will never appear in any official record anywhere. You came here for the water, or at least that's what you told yourself on the way over. You stayed, like everyone always does, for the truth. Let's talk now about hierarchy, Because in this building, your entire sense of worth within the company can be measured almost precisely by where exactly you happen to sit. Down here on the open floor, you have your cubicle, one among dozens, functionally indistinguishable from all the others around it. But along the outer walls, bathed in actual genuine sunlight, sit the offices with real doors. And right at the very top of this whole ecosystem sits the corner office, a room with 2 full windows, a large wooden desk, and an occupant who, by all accounts, hasn't made his own coffee in at least 15 years. Everyone on the floor understands the unwritten rules instinctively. You don't sit in the better chair when you're called into someone's office. You don't speak until you're spoken to. And you absolutely never enter the corner office unless you've been specifically summoned. Usually, as you now know all too well, by that exact same flat, unreadable voicemail that ruined your morning. The physical geography of the floor tells you almost everything you need to know about power here, and it does so at a single glance. The lower ranks live in the center of the open floor, in that great sprawling field of cubicles, far from any window, lit entirely by the flat, colorless hum of overhead fluorescent tubes. The more senior staff cling to the outer perimeter, where the actual windows are, so that a person's rank within the company can be roughly estimated just by measuring their proximity to natural daylight. To rise within this company is, quite literally, to move gradually toward the sun, cubicle by cubicle, until one day you might actually feel it on your own face again. The offices with doors represent the first real milestone along that path, the first visible proof that you've risen above the general herd. A door means you can have a private conversation nobody else on the floor can overhear. A door means you can shut out the constant noise, the ringing phones, the collective sighing, the smell of somebody's reheated lunch drifting down the hallway. To someone still sitting in a cubicle, a door represents an almost mythical luxury, something worth years of quiet, patient effort to finally earn. And at the absolute summit of it all sits the corner office, the throne room, occupying the single most valuable piece of real estate in the entire building. It has not one window but 2, meeting at the corner to flood the whole room with light. It has a genuine wooden desk, or at least a very convincing imitation of one, rather than the laminate covering every other surface on the floor below. It has its own small seating area, a healthy plant that an outside service comes by regularly to water, and an occupant who, somewhere along the way, ascended entirely beyond the reach of ordinary daily tasks. The person inside that office hasn't performed a single small daily chore in what feels like living memory. He doesn't make his own coffee. He genuinely doesn't know where the supply closet is located. He has people for all the small frictions of ordinary working life, an assistant who guards his door, and an entire floor full of cubicles that exists, as far as he's concerned, mainly to make things appear on his desk and then quietly disappear again once handled. The rules governing all of this remain entirely unwritten, and yet completely absolute, absorbed by every new hire within roughly a week of starting. You don't sit in the good chair in a superior's office unless you're specifically invited to, and even then, you usually choose the lesser of the 2 available seats. You don't speak first. You don't linger longer than necessary. You knock. You wait. You enter only once you've been clearly acknowledged, and you read the room carefully for the exact moment your presence is no longer required. This hierarchy is enforced by no rulebook that anyone's ever actually seen. Only by 1,000 small, quiet signals everyone has silently agreed to obey. It's finally time for lunch, the true midpoint of your entire day, and honestly, the only single hour that genuinely belongs to you. Let's step out of the building for a moment. Your options today are the food court over at the nearby mall, a sandwich shop with a line stretching out the front door, or the break room microwave, which, if you use it, will fill the entire floor with the smell of somebody's reheated fish for the remainder of the afternoon. The moment lunch actually arrives, the whole building seems to exhale at once. The phones ring a little less. The steady tapping of keyboards slows and then stops almost entirely. People rise up out of their cubicles the way prairie dogs sense a sudden shift in the weather, and there's a kind of collective, unspoken agreement that for the next hour, the ordinary machinery of the company may quietly idle. This single hour genuinely belongs to you in a way no other part of the day ever quite manages to, and everyone on the floor guards it fiercely, because it's the one stretch of time the company has grudgingly agreed not to fully own. The food court at the nearby mall is the grand option, a bustling hall full of competing smells and glowing signs. You walk over with a coworker or two, choosing from a dozen different counters, each staffed by a teenager, each offering some slightly different variation on the same basic fried food. You eat off a plastic tray at a plastic table, surrounded by the noise of shoppers passing through, and for about 30 minutes, you're not really an employee at all, just a regular person in the world, watching strangers walk by carrying shopping bags. The sandwich shop nearby is the more reliable middle option, close enough to walk to, good enough to be worth the wait. And there's always a line snaking out the door right at the exact moment your lunch hour begins, full of people from every beige office building in the surrounding business park, all of them silently counting down the same precious 60 minutes. You wait patiently. You watch the clock. You finally reach the counter, order the exact same thing you always order, and carry your paper-wrapped lunch back either to your desk or, if the weather's decent, to a bench outside in the actual sun. The break room microwave is really the option of last resort, and using it comes with a fairly heavy social cost attached. You brought leftovers from home, and reheating them means committing a small act of aggression against the entire floor, because whatever smell you release will drift straight out of the break room, travel through the building's air system, and quietly announce your lunch choice to every single cubicle on the floor. And if what you happen to bring was fish, you've crossed a line from which there is genuinely no coming back. That smell will haunt the floor until well past 5 o'clock, and everyone will know, without a doubt, exactly who was responsible. The truly legendary lunch, the stuff people still talk about weeks later, is the client lunch, because a client lunch is both long and completely free. When an actual client is involved, the usual rules bend considerably, and your normal hour comfortably stretches into 2. You sit down at a real restaurant with actual cloth napkins. You order something you genuinely never pay for out of your own pocket. And at the very end, a manager quietly produces a company credit card and makes the entire bill simply disappear. You return to the office slowly, unhurried, feeling briefly like someone important, momentarily forgetting the fabric box waiting patiently for your return. But every lunch eventually ends, and the walk back always carries a small, familiar grief with it. You step back into the beige building, full and heavy and more than a little reluctant, and you lower yourself back into your chair to face the cruelest stretch of the entire day, the long, slow crawl from 1 o'clock to 5. The food sits warm and heavy in your stomach, gently pulling you toward sleep, and somehow the clock has never once moved more slowly than it does right now. Let's be honest, for a moment, about exactly how these afternoon hours actually pass, because they are not, strictly speaking, entirely devoted to work. Somewhere on your beige computer live 2 of the most quietly dangerous pieces of software ever installed on an office machine, Solitaire and Minesweeper. You tell yourself you'll play just one quick game. 3 hours later, you're still clicking away, chasing a card layout that was probably never solvable to begin with. Solitaire is the quieter of the 2 temptations, and somehow the more insidious for it. It came pre-installed on the machine, presenting itself as a harmless little way to practice using the mouse. But it's a trap. You deal a single hand, telling yourself it's just a 2-minute reset before you get back to the report. Then you lose, and naturally you have to play again because you can't possibly end on a loss. Then you win, and you have to play again, just to see if you can manage it twice in a row. The whole afternoon dissolves slowly, one deal at a time. Minesweeper is the sharper of the 2. The one that really grips your entire brain. It's a grid of gray squares hiding invisible mines, and it demands genuine logical thinking, which is exactly why it's so quietly devastating. You click, you calculate, you carefully flag the dangers, and you're always one careless move away from an explosion that ends the whole board instantly. It gives you just enough of an actual puzzle to feel like real thinking, which means playing it feels almost virtuous, almost like legitimate work. It is not work. It is a beautifully disguised way to feed an entire hour into a grid of gray squares and receive absolutely nothing back in return. The real genius of both games is that, from a distance, they look exactly like working. To passing glance, a person clicking intently at a screen, brow furrowed in apparent concentration, is the very picture of an engaged employee. Nobody walking by 10 feet away can tell whether you're calculating a quarterly budget or the location of a hidden mine. It's perfect camouflage, a form of idleness that photographs, convincingly, as diligence. The screensaver becomes an accomplice in all of this, and it's usually the thing that eventually gives you away. When you step off to refill your coffee and leave the machine sitting idle, it takes over the screen with whatever strange little animation you've chosen. A squadron of small winged toasters flaps endlessly across a black sky, going absolutely nowhere. A single glowing pipe slowly assembles itself in 3 dimensions, twisting into an impossible metal knot. Every single one of these is a bright, flashing announcement to anyone walking by that this particular desk has been abandoned. So you develop the reflex, the essential survival skill of every office worker in this decade. The instant slap of the mouse the moment your manager rounds the corner into your peripheral vision, before your conscious mind has even fully registered the threat. Let's talk now about how you actually keep track of people, because there's no synced digital contact list here, no cloud, no simply typing a name into a glowing rectangle. Instead, sitting right there on your desk is a Rolodex, a small rotating wheel of index cards, each one holding a name, a phone number, and quite possibly a small coffee stain earned over the years. To call someone, you spin the wheel, find their card, and dial the number by hand, one satisfying mechanical click at a time. If you ever lose that Rolodex, you lose absolutely everyone in it. The device itself is a small marvel of mechanical simplicity, a rotating drum of cards mounted on a spindle, sitting on the corner of your desk with a genuine air of quiet importance. You flick it with a finger and it spins freely, cards flipping past in a satisfying blur until you slow it down to a stop right at the letter you need. Each individual card sits held in place by a small notch, and adding a new one means carefully threading it onto the spindle just right. The cards themselves form a wonderfully chaotic archive of your entire working life, and no two are ever quite alike. Some are neatly typed and official-looking. Most are scrawled by hand, in your own handwriting or in the handwriting of whoever happened to own this particular desk before you did. There are numbers crossed out and rewritten, notes squeezed tightly into the margins, a faded coffee ring blooming right across a client's name. It reads, in a strange way, almost like an autobiography told entirely through a stack of contacts. But here lies the genuinely terrifying fragility hiding at the heart of the whole system, the thing you try very hard not to think about too often. Your entire professional network, every single client, every contact, every carefully built relationship, exists in exactly one physical place. On these cards, on this one spinning wheel, sitting right here on your desk, there's no backup. There's no copy stored safely in the cloud because there is, quite simply, no cloud yet to speak of. An entire lifetime of professional connections is balanced precariously on a single object that one clumsy elbow could send crashing to the floor, scattering your whole career loose across the carpet in seconds. And yet, despite all of that fragility, you trust this thing completely, because in this particular decade, it genuinely represents the absolute pinnacle of personal organization available to you. This is as good as it gets. A spinning drum of index cards that puts every single person you need directly at your fingertips. You can't really imagine a better system, because, as far as you know, a better system simply doesn't exist yet. And finally, let's talk about the small plastic device clipped to your belt that quietly rules your entire life outside these office walls, the pager. It's roughly the size of a matchbox, and its one and only job is to buzz at the absolute worst possible moment and display a phone number on its small screen. That's it. That's the entire function of this machine. When it goes off, you have to find a phone, any phone at all, and call the number back just to discover what the emergency actually was. Usually it's your boss. Occasionally it's your spouse, asking you to please remember to pick up milk on the way home. The device could not be simpler, and that simplicity is really the entire problem with it. It's a small black or gray box, no larger than a matchbox, clipped to your belt or tucked into a pocket, doing absolutely nothing at all until the exact moment it decides to interrupt your peace. It has a tiny screen capable of displaying a single line of numbers and nothing else whatsoever. No words, no context, just the one talent it exercises without mercy, making a phone number appear on your hip and quietly demanding that you do something about it right now. Its timing, without fail, is never in your favor. The pager sleeps quietly through every calm, convenient moment of your entire day, only to erupt into its insistent buzz at the exact instant you're least able to respond to it. It goes off in the middle of a movie. It goes off during dinner, buzzing loudly against the table. It goes off while you're in the shower, forcing a dripping, frantic sprint across the bathroom floor. You are, in a very real sense, a knight forever awaiting a summons that can arrive from anyone holding the number, at any hour of the day or night, and you have absolutely no way to reply, only the obligation to go find a working telephone as quickly as you possibly can. Once a year, a very particular kind of dread settles over the entire floor, the annual performance review. Let's step into a small room where your manager sits across from you, holding a folder with your name printed neatly on the tab. Inside it are notes covering your entire year, including, almost certainly, some mention of that one incident back in March that you had genuinely hoped everyone had forgotten about by now. The dread begins building weeks in advance, from the exact moment the review first appears on the shared calendar like a small, dark cloud sitting on the horizon. You're asked to complete a self-evaluation first, a document that requires you to rate your own performance on a numbered scale, a beautifully cruel little trap if there ever was one. Rate yourself too high, and you risk seeming arrogant, out of touch with reality. Rate yourself too low, and you've quietly handed them all the ammunition they'll need. You sit there for the better part of an hour, trying to describe your own competence using nothing but numbers, sweating gently over whether you're really a 4 or a 5 when it comes to teamwork. A question no reasonable human being should ever really have to answer about themselves. The room itself seems chosen specifically for maximum discomfort, a small conference room, or your manager's own office, door firmly closed behind you. Your manager sits across the table holding that folder, the sacred folder, a physical dossier bearing your name and an entire year of your working life tucked inside it. There's a fresh legal pad sitting ready. There's a printed form covered in a grid of small boxes waiting to be checked. There's a pen that clicks, over and over, in the particular silence of someone about to deliver news you genuinely cannot predict. He smiles in a way that reveals absolutely nothing about what's coming next. That folder, you learn fairly quickly, has a terrifyingly long memory. Somewhere buried in those pages is a note about that exact incident back in March. The thing you'd hoped everyone had quietly let go of, the thing you yourself had nearly managed to forget, now carefully preserved in ink and about to be read back to you in full. It turns out your manager has been quietly filing away small moments all year long, the good and the bad both. And the bad moments, naturally, always seem to come with the most detailed notes attached. The feedback itself arrives wrapped in so many careful layers of corporate softening that decoding what it actually means becomes its own genuine challenge. You're told you're a valued contributor, which sounds nice enough, and then you're told about your opportunities for growth, which is really just the gentle, HR-approved way of saying here is a fairly detailed list of everything you did wrong this year. Each individual criticism arrives carefully sandwiched between two compliments, A technique so transparent that you learn, fairly quickly, to brace yourself the moment you hear the word however. The numerical rating is the strange, reductive heart of the entire process. The single moment your whole complicated year gets flattened down into one digit on a scale. A full year of effort, of small triumphs and small disasters and long gray afternoons, compressed into a 3, or, if you're genuinely fortunate, a 4. Nobody ever actually receives a 5, because a 5 would suggest there's simply no more room left for improvement, and a person with no room left for improvement might reasonably expect a much bigger raise. The scale, quietly, is rigged from the start, and everyone on this floor already knows it. Which finally brings you to the money, the actual reason you've endured all of this in the first place. After the ratings, after the growth opportunities, after March gets brought back up one more time, comes the raise, announced with the solemn weight of a great and generous gift. It's roughly 3%. You do the math on the drive home that evening and quietly realize that prices this year climbed by more than that, which means your official reward for a full year of loyal service is to earn, in real terms, slightly less than you did the year before. You've just been formally congratulated on a pay cut. Let's talk about a genuine, meaningful change sweeping quietly through this office, the arrival of proper workplace conduct training. For the very first time, the entire department is being gathered into the conference room to sit through a series of educational videos about how to behave decently around other human beings at work. The acting in these videos is spectacularly, almost impressively bad. The scenarios are painfully staged, and everyone in the room stares fixedly at the carpet, doing their absolute best to avoid making eye contact with anyone else. It begins with a memo announcing mandatory training, 2 words that together summon an audible groan across the entire floor the moment they're read out loud. There's no opting out of it, no rescheduling, no quietly pretending you never saw the memo. On the appointed day, the whole department files into the conference room, and there, waiting at the front, is a television perched on a tall rolling cart, wheeled in from wherever exactly such carts spend the rest of their lives, with a boxy video player humming quietly beneath it. Everyone in the room recognizes the setup immediately. It's the exact same cart that used to mean a substitute teacher, back in school. The videos themselves are genuine works of art, if the art form in question happens to be discomfort. They were clearly produced on a modest budget by people who had never actually met a real office worker in their lives, and they star actors delivering their lines with all the natural warmth of a hostage reading a prepared statement. A man in a tie says something inappropriate to a coworker. The coworker turns, looks directly into the camera, and the scene freezes mid-motion with a dramatic sound effect, while a narrator's voice calmly asks the audience what exactly went wrong here. The scenarios are staged with a painful, earnest awkwardness that makes the entire room squirm together, as one. The situations are meant to feel realistic, and instead land somewhere far stranger, populated by characters who speak in complete, grammatically perfect sentences about respect and personal boundaries and appropriate workplace conduct. Nobody in real life has ever actually talked the way these people talk. And yet the subject matter sits close enough to real life that watching it unfold in a room full of your actual, real coworkers becomes its own quiet exercise in collective agony, everyone hyper-aware of everyone else, nobody daring to react out loud. Underneath all that discomfort, though, something genuinely real is happening, and it deserves to be named plainly and honestly. For all the terrible acting and the frozen dramatic pauses and the narrator's earnest rhetorical questions, these videos represent an actual meaningful shift taking place in the culture of this workplace. They exist because the old way of doing things, the desk ashtrays, the casual cruelties, the things that simply used to go unspoken and unaddressed, is finally being examined and at long last found wanting. It's clumsy. It's honestly overdue by several years. But it is a workplace slowly, awkwardly, genuinely learning to be a little better than it used to be. Let's talk now about what this job is quietly doing to your body over time, day after day, without you fully noticing it happening. You spend 8 full hours a day sitting in a chair that seems to have been designed by someone who's never actually had a spine of their own, adjusting a single working lever that somehow only ever seems to make things worse. Your wrist has begun to ache steadily from a full day of clicking and typing on a keyboard, positioned at exactly the wrong height for your arms. The chair really is the primary instrument of your slow physical decline, waging its quiet campaign against you 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. It's a swiveling contraption of scratchy fabric and stubborn plastic, equipped with levers that promise real adjustment and deliver, in practice, only new and different varieties of discomfort. The lumbar support presses firmly into exactly the wrong spot on your lower back. The seat itself is subtly angled to slide you gently forward all day long, so that by the afternoon you find yourself quietly bracing against gravity without ever quite noticing you're doing it. Your wrist is the next real casualty, and it's the first part of your body to file a formal, persistent complaint. A full day of typing and clicking on a keyboard set at precisely the wrong height sends a dull, steady ache creeping up from your hand, a small, persistent throb that shows up right around lunchtime and simply stays with you through the rest of the evening. Into all of this suffering floats a promising new word, whispered around the office almost like a rumor of salvation: ergonomics. Someone read about it in a magazine somewhere. It's the science, apparently, of designing a workplace so that it doesn't slowly wear down the people working inside it, a genuinely intriguing new concept that, for now, arrives in the form of a single foam wrist rest, a squishy gray bar you place in front of your keyboard, one that helps almost nothing at all, but that you keep anyway because it represents at least a small flicker of hope. Meanwhile, the monitor conducts its own slow, quiet assault from directly in front of you. It's a deep glass tube roughly the size of a small microwave, and your neck bends steadily toward it all day long, holding a posture no human neck was ever really designed to hold for 8 consecutive hours. The glowing screen dries out your eyes until you're blinking, by late afternoon, like someone emerging from a long stretch underground. And so, by 5 o'clock, the accumulated toll of the day reveals itself all at once, in the simple act of finally standing up from your chair. You rise, and your body quietly catalogs its grievances in sequence. The stiff back, the aching wrist, the crick settled into your neck, the general sense of having somehow aged several years since this morning. You move toward the elevator like someone twice your actual age, unfolding yourself carefully, one joint at a time. Let's address, too, the quiet fear that hangs constantly over the entire floor, mostly unspoken, the threat of layoffs. Times are uncertain this year. The wider economy is nervous, and management has recently started using a new, chilling word, downsizing, as though the process of letting people go is really just a simple matter of tidying up some numbers on a spreadsheet. Every closed-door meeting sends a small ripple of quiet anxiety through the surrounding cubicles. The fear itself is never spoken aloud, which is precisely what gives it so much quiet power over everyone. It lives underneath the ordinary business of the day, a low, constant hum beneath the ringing phones and the clicking keyboards, felt clearly by everyone and named directly by absolutely no one. The language itself is part of the cruelty here, and everyone on the floor senses it instinctively. Management never says firing people because firing sounds harsh, sounds personal, sounds like something with an actual human victim attached to it. Instead, they've adopted this smooth, bloodless new word, downsizing, reframing the ending of someone's entire livelihood as a simple matter of trimming, adjusting, making the organization leaner. The closed-door meeting becomes a great omen, the thing the whole floor quietly learns to watch for out of the corner of their eye. When managers gather behind a closed door for a meeting that appears on no visible calendar, a ripple of quiet dread moves steadily through the cubicles below. And the clipboard becomes the other great warning sign, its effect on the floor almost darkly comic in its intensity. Let a stranger from an upper floor appear at the end of the row holding a clipboard, walking slowly, glancing carefully at each cubicle, and the entire department transforms in an instant. Idle conversation stops mid-sentence. Games of solitaire vanish from screens. 40 people suddenly find themselves deeply, visibly absorbed in urgent work, performing productivity for an audience of exactly one, who may or may not be holding an actual list of names. You've watched how it ends because you've seen it happen with your own eyes more than once. A coworker, someone you were chatting with at the water cooler just last week, quietly packing the entire contents of their desk into a single cardboard box, and then making that long, silent walk down the row of cubicles, past the front desk, out through the door, carrying an entire career away in one small box. Nobody quite manages eye contact. Everybody watches anyway. It could quite easily have been anyone. It could quite easily be you next. Let's turn, thankfully, to one of the few genuine, uncomplicated joys of office life: the break room celebration. Someone has a birthday today, or a work anniversary, or is finally retiring after decades. And so, at 3 in the afternoon, a slightly lopsided sheet cake appears on the break room table, sitting next to a stack of thin paper plates. An email goes out, or a card gets quietly passed around the floor, and for about 15 genuinely glorious minutes, the entire building simply stops working. The occasion itself barely matters, and honestly, that's part of the charm. It might be a birthday, someone turning a year older whether they particularly wanted it announced to the whole floor or not. It might be a work anniversary, 5 years or 10, marked with a card and a store-bought cake. Whatever the specific reason happens to be, it produces the exact same magic phrase, passed quietly from cubicle to cubicle in a low, hopeful murmur: "There's cake in the break room." The cake itself is never fancy, and honestly, nobody particularly wishes that it were. It comes from the grocery store down the road, a rectangular slab sitting under a clear plastic dome, decorated by a bakery employee who was clearly working from only the vaguest possible description. The message piped across the top in shaky icing is often slightly wrong somehow, a name misspelled, a number squeezed awkwardly into a corner that's too small for it. The whole thing tilts a little to one side. It's imperfect in every conceivable way, and it's beautiful precisely because it's free, and because it's here, and because it means the long afternoon has, for a few minutes, been genuinely interrupted. Let's talk now about the exact moment every single office worker in this decade quietly dreads: the instant your computer freezes solid, taking an entire unsaved morning's worth of work down with it. The screen locks. The cursor simply stops moving. You press every key on the keyboard in a rising, useless panic, which, of course, accomplishes absolutely nothing. And so you make the call to the one person in this entire building who holds true, unquestionable power: the IT guy. The freeze always arrives without warning, right in the middle of your most focused, most productive stretch of the entire day. One moment you're typing steadily, thoughts flowing freely, and important documents slowly taking shape beneath your fingers. The next moment the machine simply stops. The cursor freezes mid-blink. You click. Nothing happens. You click again, harder this time, as though sheer force might somehow wake it back up. Nothing happens. Having exhausted your own limited powers, you reach for the phone, because there is exactly one person in this building who can save you now. He arrives eventually, on his own personal schedule, because the IT guy simply cannot be rushed by anyone. He appears at the entrance to your cubicle carrying a mug and an air of profound, weary superiority, the bearing of a man who's witnessed this exact same crisis at least 1,000 times before and has long since stopped being remotely impressed by it. He crouches down beneath your desk, into the tangle of cables and dust you've never once dared to explore yourself, and does something down there you can't quite see. He emerges, reaches past you, and restarts the machine with a quiet confidence that borders on the genuinely divine. And as the computer slowly groans back to life, he delivers the words that always, without fail, accompany this exact ritual, muttered rather than actually spoken out loud: "You should really save more often." Your morning's work is gone. vanished into whatever void claims unsaved documents, and you nod along solemnly, accepting the lesson, quietly promising yourself you'll save constantly from this moment until the end of time. Let's close your eyes for just a moment now, and simply listen to the office around you. Underneath the low hum of machines and the murmur of quiet conversation runs a constant, gentle stream of what might genuinely be the blandest music ever composed by human beings. It pipes softly down from speakers hidden somewhere in the ceiling tiles, a smooth instrumental version of a song you almost recognize, drained entirely of anything resembling real emotion. When you call another company later and get placed on hold, you're treated to more of this exact same sound, an endless loop of soft saxophone, gently assuring you that your call is important while you slowly, quietly lose the will to keep waiting. The music is always there, playing constantly, and that's really the entire point of it. An unbroken layer of sound so steady and so constant that you eventually stop consciously hearing it at all. It drifts evenly across the whole floor at a volume just loud enough to fill the silence and just soft enough to comfortably ignore. Someone somewhere took a song you actually know, a real song, with feeling and lyrics and an actual beat, and surgically removed everything about it that ever made it feel like a real song in the first place. The result is a version so thoroughly drained of any emotion that you can recognize the melody without ever quite being able to name it. A ghost of a song, quietly haunting the ceiling tiles above you. And the final, small indignity, the true proof of its complete and total victory over you, arrives days later when you least expect it. You're standing at home in the shower, and you catch yourself humming it, that same shapeless, smooth melody from the ceiling, that exact saxophone from the hold music. It has followed you out of the building entirely, lodged somewhere deep in your brain, playing itself back without your permission or your consent. And finally, let's talk about the corporate retreat, a full mandatory day of fun that everyone on the floor is somehow contractually expected to genuinely enjoy. The company loads the whole department onto a chartered bus and drives everyone out to somewhere with actual grass, where a very enthusiastic hired facilitator is waiting to help you properly bond with the exact same coworkers you already spend 40 hours a week sitting near. There are name tags. There are icebreakers. And at some point, inevitably, there is the trust fall, in which you're asked to close your eyes and simply collapse backward into the waiting arms of a coworker from accounting. A man you genuinely wouldn't trust to hold your sandwich for you, let alone your entire spine. The retreat begins with a profound contradiction baked directly into its very name, mandatory fun. You're informed, not invited, that attendance is entirely required, and that the stated purpose of the day is somehow to relax, to bond, and to genuinely enjoy yourself. There's something deeply strange about being formally ordered to have a good time, about fun itself appearing on your calendar as an obligation with a fixed start time and end time attached to it. Waiting at the destination is the facilitator, a person of truly alarming and seemingly inexhaustible enthusiasm, hired specifically to help everyone bond, and approaching the entire task with the relentless, unshakable energy of a children's television host. The activities themselves are engineered specifically to force connection, beginning with awkward icebreakers, where you're asked to share a genuine fun fact about yourself with a coworker you've sat only 20 feet away from for the past 3 years without ever really speaking to. And then comes the main event, the exercise the entire day has been quietly building toward, the trust fall. You're asked to stand with your back to your colleagues, close your eyes, and simply topple backward. Surrendering your entire body weight to the solemn promise that someone behind you will actually catch it. You survive it, of course. Everyone always does. And you line up afterward for the group photo, and you smile, a real enough smile, honestly, because there really is a strange, small kind of camaraderie in having endured this whole day together as a group. Then Monday arrives, and you return to the beige building, and you lower yourself back down into your usual chair, and absolutely nothing about your day-to-day working life has actually changed. The hierarchy sits exactly where it always was. The corner office is still, very much, the corner office. But somewhere upstairs, in one of the offices with an actual door, management feels genuinely wonderful about the whole thing, quietly certain that morale has been meaningfully built, and that, in the end, really was the entire point of the day. So there you have it, a single, ordinary day inside a 1990s American office. You woke to a screaming alarm clock, drove 40 minutes with nothing but a paper map and a morning radio show for company, and arrived at a beige rectangle of a building where a familiar security guard still asked to see a badge he'd already seen 1,000 times before. You waited patiently for a computer to groan slowly awake. You drank coffee that tasted like burnt pennies and quiet disappointment. You fed a screaming fax machine, lost a long war against the photocopier, and sat through a 90-minute meeting that genuinely could have been a single short sentence. You learned to speak a language where no real problem was ever officially called a problem, only ever an opportunity. You survived the blinking red light of doom, the small tyranny of the pager, and a 3% raise that somehow, quietly, left you a little poorer than you'd started. It wasn't glamorous. The chair hurt your back. The monitor dried out your eyes. A cold, quiet shadow of downsizing hung faintly over every closed office door. But there was real warmth in it too, found at the water cooler, and in the smoke break by the loading dock, in all those small, human moments people managed to carve out of one long, gray day. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep with an entire world quietly sitting in your pocket, able to send a message clear across the planet in a single silent second, maybe spare a gentle thought for the people who once worked inside those fabric boxes. The ones who dialed every number by hand, who waited patiently through that dial-up shriek, and who kept the whole beige machine quietly running, day after day, without ever knowing it was all eventually going to disappear. Sleep well.